What's up, Ada Nation? Welcome to Dapp Central, your home for everything blockchain and crypto. My name's Fareed. As a part of today's video, we're doing something a little bit different. First and foremost, shout out to the entire Waffle Capital team for allowing me to provide you guys with some exclusive content here for an event that they just held in person in Hong Kong. Now, this video is about 30 to 40 minutes long, where the conversation is entirely all about governance. Now, this is done between two prominent members within the Cardano ecosystem, Sheldon Hunt and Yuri Bronner. But then there's also another third party or another third member who's coming in directly from the Polkadot ecosystem. Now, if you aren't aware, Polkadot is slightly further ahead in governance, but Cardano's right on their heels and really following in their footsteps. So as a part of their conversation here, which is hosted by Ada Baguette, also known as Rashawn, I believe, basically breaks down the nuances between Cardano governance as well as Polkadot governance, talking about resiliency, some of the challenges that each of the ecosystems has faced, and then breaking down, or at least at the very end, giving the community an opportunity to actually ask them questions. So I want to quickly just highlight here for anybody who isn't aware, again, shout out to the entire Waffle Capital team here for allowing me to provide you guys with this content. But if it's your first time hearing about Waffle Capital, it states that they're a BVI incubator fund that's strategically investing in the most promising native assets and protocols within the Cardano ecosystem. So they're doing their research, finding the biggest protocols with the most potential, and then providing them monetary or financial support. Jumping over here, there's a fully dedicated blog breaking down the entire panel discussion. Now that we got that out of the way there, I won't take up any more of your time. I wanted to at least set the foundation here. Very interesting conversation. Let me know how you guys appreciate it. But if you enjoy content like this, of course, make sure to smash that thumbs up on the way in. If you want more content like this, breaking everything down going on here in Cardano, including governance, consider subscribing to Dapp Central. And last but not least, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave a comment down below. That said, enjoy today's interview.
I'm Roshan Galani, a DeFi analyst here at Waffle Capital, and I'm excited to introduce you to tonight's panel on governance, featuring key perspectives from major blockchains. Tonight, I'm joined by three distinguished guests. We have Yuri Bronner, CEO of Waffle Capital, Sheldon Hunt, head of the Cardano ecosystem from Emurgo, which is one of the first founding entities of Cardano, and we have Max Riebel, representing a Polkadot VC fund, Harbor Industrial Capital, as their CEO and managing partner, and also Polkaport East as an affiliate of the Web3 Foundation. Each of our panelists brings a unique perspective, providing insights from a DeFi fund, founding entity, and ecosystem VC. To give everyone a heads up on tonight's format, I'll guide our discussions with questions directed at the specific panelists, and then open the floor up for any questions. So please save them till the end. We'll be aiming for a 30-minute discussion, after which you're all invited to stay for some refreshments. So to begin, let's have each of you introduce yourselves, please.
All right, thank you very much for having me here. I think doing cross ecosystem events like this is definitely something we should do more of here in Hong Kong, anywhere in the world. So it's really good to see this event taking place. So my name is Max Riebel. I am the co-founder and managing partner of Harbor Industrial Capital, which is a private Polkadot ecosystem fund. Fund 1 is kind of done and dusted, and Fund 2 is currently in the raise. The foundation is also going to be part of it, so it's kind of an official Polkadot ecosystem fund. And yeah. Looking forward to this discussion.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm Yuri Bronner, I'm the CEO of Waffle Capital. We essentially do the same thing, except we do it under different flags. So what we do is the same thing. We're a private fund running on Cardano, and we're here basically to talk about the ecosystem in which we operate in. Very excited to have this conversation.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sheldon Hunt, and it's a pleasure to have all of you guys here tonight. This is a bit of like a homecoming for me in terms of like my crypto journey. I was here 11 years ago, so it's great to be back in the beginning of it all, for myself at least personally. But yes, I am head of the Cardano ecosystem with Emurgo, and as was pointing out earlier, Emurgo is one of the founding entities of Cardano, one of the three. It's main mandate is about commercial adoption and promoting partnerships across Web3. And so we'll get into some of the juicy details of what that means in practice, but for many of you guys, I think you want to learn about what we think about governance. And today's a very topical day to be getting into governance. You might have noticed there was a little bit of old world politics happening, and it colors things in a nice background. But we'll get into, I think, some of that later on, but wanted to thank you again for being here tonight.
Yeah, so actually, before diving into our questions, just to contextualize for everyone, Yuri, could you provide us with a brief introduction on governance within Cardano?
Sure. So, governance. Governance. It's an election night, so we have to talk about governance. The thing about a blockchain is it's a little bit like it's an economy of its own, really, if you think about what happens on a blockchain. So think about it like as a country or as a company, basically. It's a bunch of human beings getting together and doing activity together. And so at the beginning we had Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was great, and we had Ethereum, but both these blockchains just didn't have a mechanism in which people could come together essentially and decide which direction we go into. It's like saying, you have a company or a country, but there's no election process. There's no elected people. Who's in charge, basically. And so what that led was that we have things now like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and some other versions of Bitcoin. We have Ethereum. We have Ethereum Classic. And basically, what are those? For those of you who've been here long enough, those are basically forks. They're splits. It's like basically civil war inside an ecosystem. So parts of the people who are in it just kind of leave and do their own thing. And that's not necessarily good for a blockchain ecosystem. Essentially what you want to do is keep everyone together and grow that economy together. And so Cardano was one of the first blockchain to tackle governance. And it's really a necessary topic. So where we are now, it's called the age of Voltaire. It's the age of governance. And this is when we start creating the structures, essentially. And what does it look like? Well, there are three sort of bodies or entities that keep each other in checks and balances. So first we have the Constitutional Committee, and they basically they act a bit like a Supreme Court. I believe there's 7 members, right? 7 members. And so these guys they're elected, and they're supposed to interpret all the new proposals coming in that people have voted into and see whether that's in line with the Constitution. By the way, the Constitution is going to be drafted in December this year in Buenos Aires. There's 50 delegates from all around the world that are getting together and will draft the final piece. First, so that's the Constitutional Committee. Second, we have the Congress, the delegated representatives. Anyone can become a delegated representative, even if you have a very small amount delegated to you. You could still be a small fish, essentially. There's no limit to how many fish can swim in the aquarium. And those are basically sort of act like the Congress people. They will vote on proposals and discuss them, etc. And they basically represent a whole bunch of ADA, a whole bunch of people who have delegated to them. So you could have 20 million, 50 million, and so forth. Finally, we have the stateful operators. Those are the validators of the network, right? So for all of you who are familiar with a blockchain, those are the people who maintain the blockchain. And so they sort of are the last step. Once everything has been approved, it has to, sort of like the upgrade has to happen, and they are the ones responsible for initiating that, implementing that upgrade on chain. That's where we are.
Yeah, and Sheldon, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, that was a great overview of kind of like the structures of it all. And yeah, so like, actually I had been involved in Cardano governance now going back about 3 years ago. So a little bit of context, right? Like the idea of having governance on Cardano or even in Polkadot, they don't just fall from the sky, right? These are things that need to be designed and planned for in advance. And it was one of the initial kind of principles set out, I think, by a lot of different protocols that you want to have a decentralized future. And how are you going to like best execute upon actions that need to be taken for this, as we now refer to, it's kind of like a digital nation state. And so that's something that comes up quite a bit in a lot of these discussions. And there was a decision made early on that we want to be as close as possible to a liquid democracy. And with this form of liquid democracy, using what has worked really well for like staking on Cardano, where you could essentially stake and restake to other various node operators, you could do the same thing with your votes. So you can delegate your own votes to yourself. You can vote as an independent, or you can throw your votes, your ADA power, behind somebody you align with. And so it opens up the possibility to just be changing depending upon the various discussions being had at any one point. So it's quite interesting to have it all come together. But a little bit of like peeking behind the curtain as to why this was revved up and brought up so quickly. Well, we had for 4 years a pretty adversarial US government, and even before, during Trump's time, it wasn't the best, right? We think about what happened with XRP. And so there was a need to prioritize giving the protocols to their holders and do it in a sustainable way. Are they perfect? Hell no. But it is a great start. And we were talking earlier on about like, what does it mean to actually hit the threshold for true on-chain governance? Because various protocols can say that like, we're doing on-chain governance, but how do you judge that? Because you could say like, oh, you can sell and that's a democratic move. But for us, when it comes to, I think, Polkadot and Cardano, we're in a good spot where we can kind of quite confidently say we're having quite impactful elections already. And we're excited to see where things go from here, because it's really just the beginning.
Thank you for that, Sheldon. And now over to Max. Could you provide us with a high-level overview of Polkadot's governance model and what sets it apart?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that Polkadot is a little bit ahead, just like time-wise, in terms of implementing governance. We also I heard what you were saying about sort of different types of councils that have kind of special privileges. So we used to have that as well on Polkadot until about 1.5 years ago, right? And there was sort of the technical fellowship, right? And there was the technical council that had certain kind of super user rights, right? So as it kind of transitioned to a full kind of liquid democracy, right, as you say, there was kind of an interim step, and it was always clear that it's supposed to be an interim step. And the logic back there was that it's a bit scary also to give your entire protocol that people spend so much time and effort into the hands of the users, because you never know what's going to go wrong, right? There could be malicious actors. If you're talking about blockchains, your default assumption should always be that any user is a malicious actor, right? That's one of the principles of blockchain development. That's true for staking, right? No matter if it's proof of work and proof of stake, and it's kind of true for governance, right? You should assume that anyone is always trying to maximize their own benefit at the expense of other people's benefit. And so I guess at the beginning we had this interim step where there's this technical fellowship, and then when was it, mid last year, we kind of had this transition to OpenGov. And that essentially got rid of these special privileges of the technical fellowship and the council that in the past could have prevented all kind of things from happening that are not in the interest of them, I guess, and did a full handover to the community, right? And that's a real sort of a maturing process, and it's actually quite fascinating that it has happened the way it has, because after that we're really at 1.1 vote, and it's absolutely on-chain, it's non-reversible, it's immutable, and if dot holders decide to vote on something that is against the interests or the plans of Gavin Wood, right, who is the founder of Polkadot, it can still happen. There are definitely some examples where it has happened, right? I mean, Gavin tries to not speak out too publicly about it, which I guess plays, which is a bit of a benefit here in this case. But there are certainly things that he wasn't that happy with, but he's accepting it because it is 1.1 vote now, and that's kind of where we are. And I'll go more into details, but yeah.
Yeah, it's good to know that both Cardano and Polkadot have a one token, one vote system, and that they both kind of started with this more bureaucratic and council approach, and now Polkadot has kind of evolved from that to break down the structure and have a more equal access to their treasury. But now that we have a good understanding of what governance looks like on these chains, over to Yuri to answer why governance is important in a blockchain.
All right. Well, governance is important for several reasons. The first one is the obvious one, is that you just need it. You just need it to come together. If you're a large group of people, or any group of people, operating anywhere in the world at the same time with no trust and no knowledge of each other, how the hell are you going to agree on upgrade number 1 or number 2? So you need that the same way you need a nation or a company to come together and have some board meetings and a way to elect the board and how they're going to choose a CEO and so forth. So it's really necessary for the longevity and sustainability of any ecosystem. In our case, in Cardano, there's even a bit of a catch to that. There is a treasury that's just been accumulating. So every time you send some ADA to one another, 20% of the transaction fee goes into a decentralized wallet. That wallet has now accumulated 1.5 billion ADA. So I mean, that's over $600 million at current prices. And so with governance will come also access to the treasury. And so if you want to get funding or you want to get things done, it's even more important that you participate, because now those two things are linked. So how do we spend basically the nation's budget, essentially? It's very important, right? Even if you don't care so much, I think the pot is large enough to hopefully generate some interest, essentially. And it's important for an ecosystem not to squander its resources.
Yeah, it's good to hear that. Actually, over to you, Max. With Polkadot's governance having launched before Cardano's, in your opinion, what have been the key successes, challenges, and lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, I want to follow up. Like, what are the things that governance is actually used for, right? And treasury spending is obviously one of the big ones here. Yes, it's also about technically upgrades, right? That's probably the first thing that people had in mind. But like the second one is, spending, because obviously similar to Cardano, Polkadot has a very large treasury that is also getting replenished all the time, and there's a lot of money at stake, right? And it's actually interesting that so far we haven't had any like outright kind of scandals where people just completely drained the treasury. Because it would be possible, right? By just having like collusion between a couple of whales that say, okay, we'll wire, 500 million, to ourselves. Like, it would be feasible to do that, but it hasn't happened yet. And that's actually interesting. It kind of proves the resilience of the protocol, right? And that's also why it's important to have this kind of gradual transition to a more democratic ecosystem, form of governance. So spending has been, somewhat under control. There are lots of stories I could tell about spending of the Polkadot treasury. It's good and bad. They're all kind of interesting things. So, for example, Polkadot recently signed a sponsorship agreement with Inter Miami, right? The football club where Messi plays, right? And as a football fan, it's pretty cool to see that Polkadot is sponsoring this in the first place. But the really amazing part about it is that the decision to sponsor this football club, and believe me, it was not cheap, right? But the decision was made fully on-chain in a fully decentralized fashion, right? That's pretty cool, right? It was not like the chief marketing officer that had like a conversation with Inter Miami to make this deal happen. It was literally every single dot holder voting on this. Somebody brought the idea forward, obviously, right? Put the proposal on chain, say, and it's public information. It was like $6 million or something like that, to have like the Polkadot logo on the jersey of Messi, and going out there as a brand ambassador. So it's a decent amount of money, but it was fully voted on by people on chain. So I think that's a really cool kind of success story, right? And there are obviously many more. Other things that have been in the news quite a lot in terms of governance is the ambassador program. So it's not just like spending that you can control, but you can also create these on-chain collectives, right? whereby people are getting voted in and out by all the token holders. So we decided, it might be a good idea to have like ambassadors, right, who get voted into this position, right, at different ranks, and who can then go out and represent Polkadot externally, right, vis-a-vis governments, vis-a-vis companies for business development, right, so that these people are not appointed by the CEO, top down, but they're actually voted, bottoms up. And so since a couple of months, I am one of the head ambassadors here who has been voted on-chain into this position, right? So I kind of secured a certain number. I put my application forward. I said, I would like to become an ambassador, go vote for me, right? And then I kind of went out campaigning, telling people why I think it's a good idea that they should vote me into this position. And in the end, it happened, right? This story is far from finished, right? It's a long story. I don't know how much time we have here, but this program itself then became, got a lot of scrutiny again, because they were like, oh no, but that's not great, and da-da-da-da-da. And now there is a counter proposal of establishing a new ambassador program, and that's currently ongoing, right? So it currently looks like all the existing ambassadors, is 21, are gonna get kicked out, and a new election under a different logic is gonna take place, right? So, I guess the point here is democracy is messy, right? Anyone can come up with any proposal, put it on chain, and if they get enough votes, it will happen. It will get executed automatically on chain. But it's kind of an exciting thing to be part of.
Yeah, it's nice to know that if something wasn't working as intended, or that some people didn't like it, that there can be a counter proposal of sorts.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that people can go back, and it's not permanent in the way that if you have a government that's maybe not performing ideally, you can't necessarily go and change that, even if everyone in a certain locality wants to do that. But I'd actually like to pinpoint on something that you were saying earlier about the centralization of power and having a bunch of people be able to come together and push through votes that maybe the larger, wider community doesn't want. And this is actually for Sheldon. As a representative of one of the Cardano entities with a lot of voting power, how do you think governance will be kept transparent and inclusive, preventing power from being too centralized?
Yes, well, so it's a really good question. And there is no obvious silver bullet answer. And yeah, so we'll have to see how things play out, because ultimately, just so everybody kind of knows, anybody who's been in Cardano for any period of time, I'm sure you guys have heard of Project Catalyst, right? For those of you who are maybe not aware, more on the Polkadot side of things, Project Catalyst is in some ways is a combination of two things, I would dare say. One is governance and playing with different governance mechanisms and voting, but it's also the grant funding program by which ADA is dispersed to the community to pay for new initiatives. And so it's been a very good test case to trial out just how the community is going to be responding to voting. And so we've had major iterations, because we're currently closing up Fund 13 now. It'll be closing tomorrow, actually, for the last segment there. And for the longest time, the founding entities of Cardano did not vote. They had this principle that they would not be engaged in any of the voting. It would be left to the community to be involved in voting. And I think it was a good approach. You let the community decide what is going to be a priority going forward. Because on the back end, because this is another issue, and we could probably talk about it all night if we wanted to, but sometimes when you do turn over the keys to the kingdom over to your community, they're maybe not always going to be inclined to be investing in some of the hard science on the back end, but in what they can relate to themselves personally in their own life, which is maybe more marketing, right? And so there's still going to be this conflict there. But when it came to Catalyst, at least, you could trial out the community engaging to try new initiatives. And so where we're at right now is that for Catalyst, the first time ever last round, and then again this round, you're going to have the founding entities be engaged in voting. So the first one to kind of break the seal there was the Cardano Foundation. Their whole approach was they were not going to throw their entire wallet at it, though. They decided that they were going to have a set amount of ADA they were going to be engaging in voting on, make that clear and transparent to start with, and then have no public position on any of the new initiatives because they didn't want to be leading or swaying the vote. It was only after voting was closed that they would then explain who they voted for and why. And so it was quite a good initiative. It took some time to bat around that. And it's going to be something that we at Emergo are likely going to be doing when it comes to on-chain voting for the whole thing. And so it's an acceptable approach, and we might get to a point where you end up voting for the founding entities their whole wallet, but it'll need to come to a point where that is transparent and that is discussed with everybody. Because I think for both of our ecosystems, we've come to a point where community holders actually collectively far outweigh any of the voting power held by the individual entities. But we do have, and this is another big topic that could go on all night, we do ultimately still have some issues around voter participation. It is a big, big issue. And so there's been talks about incentivizing people to vote, and that's part of why we wanted to have D-reps get compensated for voting. But are we going to be able to get enough people to throw their ADA around? We still don't know, right? We've got some examples of it in advance, but it's a hot topic. Because if you only have, say, 10%, 15%, max 22% of your entire ecosystem voting and speaking for the other 80%, is that truly democratic? I don't know. So we're still figuring this stuff out. It is a very hot topic, and would like to, maybe pass this over to Polkadot.
Yeah, that's actually a little bit of a call to action for anyone at home who hasn't voted yet. If you're watching this, please delegate your vote or vote yourself. But actually, this next one's for all of you. What do you see as the next major milestone for governance in your ecosystem? And what steps are necessary to achieve it successfully?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to tie this together with the response to Sheldon here. Sort of evolving, like increasing participation in governance has been very important for Polkadot as well. I guess in my answer, I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about DAOs, I want to talk about whales, and I want to talk about the foundation, right? So let's talk about DAOs. There are a few DAOs that have sort of loose associations of voters that kind of started to band together, emerged, right? So at the moment, I don't know, maybe a handful, like 10, 20, like different DAOs exist around the world, and people delegate their votes to these entities. They have emerged pretty organically, which is cool. It's maybe one guy who said, like, delegate to me, and then he realized it's too much work, like, to vote on everything. And then he got like a few other people involved, right? And then they did like some marketing for increasing delegation, right? And you can then just delegate like one dot. There is no reward for that, right? There is no incentive, but I guess that's also on purpose. So it also doesn't cost you anything, right? So you can just delegate just purely based on, I guess the way, in the US they're voting for the Democrats or the Republicans, like who you like, right? You're not getting, or like a bit like a congressman, I guess you could call it, right? Like somebody who represents you, right? You generally are aligned with this person, so you delegate to this guy. I mean, the fault lines, the major fault lines that we see emerging are more like sort of the fiscally conservative versus the fiscally spend-thrifty, let's say, right? I think that's the biggest fault line, right? Some people say like, oh yeah, let's just throw money at everything, right? Big sponsorships, big branding, big paying KOLs, right? And then the others are like, oh, like, let's better not spend that much. So you have some people, and then you can kind of delegate to whoever you feel mostly aligned with to represent your interests, because there are really literally like hundreds of proposals per month. So, your average dot holder is not going to be able to follow all those individual proposals and like evaluate them on a case-by-case basis. It's essentially like a full-time job. So these are kind of the DAOs, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Second thing are whales, right? And so obviously there are a few big whales who, are private individuals who were early, came in at the seed round, the private sale of DOT. Some of them got wealthy. Maybe they, put in a significant amount, and now they control, maybe 1%, 2% or so of the dot supply. So we have a few of these guys. And they can obviously swing a vote. And it's actually quite interesting. So when we saw OpenGov, 1.5 years ago, open up, these guys were actually super quiet. At the beginning, they didn't do anything. And then turnout was super, super low, right? Overall, we're talking about sub 1% total participation, right? And then it was quite exactly to this day, a year ago, that one big whale emerged on the scene. And at the beginning, you only saw his wallet, but he always voted with 40, 50 million dot, right? So times 5, it's $25 million worth. So, significant. And that really made a difference, right? And so he would start swing votes. And it was quite interesting because he voted a lot sort of for kind of marketing related proposals, right? So he wanted to see marketing. And then at the beginning, he was completely anonymous. But then at some point, he linked his address to his Twitter account, and his name is Giotto. It's an Italian guy. I met him in person now a few times. But he just, kind of came out of nowhere for a lot of us, right? Because we didn't know. He was early, and then he was quiet, and then he kind of came out. And his main message was, I'm holding a lot of DOT. I want the DOT price to go up. So one of the ways to achieve that is to spend more on marketing. And in the beginning, that was he was really trying to make his voice heard through voting. And with 25 million dot or so, or more. I forgot the exact number, but it was a significant amount. He obviously had a very clear sway over the vote. And as a result of that, we did see more marketing proposals, right? A lot of them were a bit random as well, but someone proposed, okay, let's put the Polkadot logo on taxis in Berlin, right? And this Giotto guy just voted yes, let's do it, right? So we spend a few $1 million on that, right? Just slapping the Polkadot logo on these taxi doors, right? But it had some impact. Was it the best way of spending marketing budget? Maybe not, right? But at least you can see how this guy is really influencing the outcome into the direction that he wants. And the last constituent that I want to talk about is the foundation, because you mentioned, how this is happening in Cardano, and how the foundation is kind of tries to incentivize, how the foundation has to figure out how to use its stack responsibly, right? And so at the beginning, the foundation was also more hands-off and said we're not gonna engage in this at all. And then sort of the solution they came up with, which is quite interesting, is called delegated voices. And here the logic is that the foundation took a certain share of their DOT holdings and delegated it to certain members of the community, right? So they put out a call for action and kind of, okay, just put out your public statement, why you want to be delegated. I think it was 5 million DOT each, right? And then we get 10 of these people and delegate them a significant, share. I think in many ways it was a bit to counteract the emergence of these whales, right? Because some of their decisions was also quite controversial, of course. And then you have a bit of a more balanced, representation. It's still the foundation making the decision who to delegate to, but I guess the important thing here to add is that it's always just a temporary delegation for a period of 3 months, right? And then somebody else can put their hand up, and if their mission statement resonates with the foundation, then they delegate to these guys, right? And then they swap them out again.
Yeah, so for everyone with Cardano, we definitely should be taking notes. We actually have a similar system over there with our delegated representatives. And perhaps it could be nice for the foundation or some of the founding entities to get involved with delegating like that. And just to clarify for anyone who's a little less technical, when you're delegating your vote, you're not actually transferring your spending power to anyone. The funds stay with you in your own wallet and no one else can spend them. It's just when the time comes to vote on something, they can vote on your behalf. And actually, to close us off, the last question I'd like to ask everyone is, how do you see governance contributing to your ecosystem's value?
Well, okay, I'll say that quickly. Hopefully discourse will be kept civil, because we already see some controversy on Twitter and people get a bit aggressive. And so governance is all about, actually the whole purpose is to stay gentlemanly, and hopefully it doesn't create the opposite effect, especially when money is concerned. Otherwise, then it's a learning process, and it makes the system more resilient, because people sort of have a consensus on what needs to be done. And that's, again, it's why it's fundamental for blockchains, countries, or corporations to have governance.
Yeah, okay, well, so there's a lot to kind of go over here real quickly. But, oh yeah, so I'll go back to also one of the earlier questions about kind of like, what do we see happening next? And certainly on Cardano, there's quite a bit, right? There's the Constitution coming. But one thing that I think is going to be interesting, and it ties into like what is going to have an impact going forward, because all of these systems, these democratic electoral systems we have right now, sometimes they're not even democratic per se, right? Like they are weighted. But it's all like just trial and error. We're very much in the early stages, and we are all like iterating on it. So there is nothing perfect right now. I can say with quite a bit of confidence on the Cardano side, a lot of it has drawn its inspiration from the United States, right? With the Constitution, levels of kind of like splits in power. It worked for the US, but it's like unmoving, right? And is it going to work for Cardano? Probably not, right? And there's questions, and you mentioned actually earlier at the start, we need to assume in all of our interactions in Web3 that basically everybody's an adversary, right? They're looking to screw you, which is not conducive to having a civil society. So we're going to have to like square some edges here and find a way forward. And I think one of them that is very interesting is around DIDs, right? I think everybody wants to talk about DIDs, but even striking the right balance with DIDs. So just so you guys know, they're decentralized identity systems. Because right now anybody can go online and say terrible things. Like, Yuri's heard all kinds of terrible things about him and what he's trying to do for Cardano. Does he deserve it? No. But you can get away with saying nasty things online because of the anonymous nature of it. Is this the way we want to carry on going forward? Perhaps not, because it allows for things to kind of run away into extremes without actually solving big problems. So with DIDs, we need to maybe have a confluence of like state power, because you don't want to also have people just sign up like your entire village and your family to kind of like just get myself into power and drain the treasury just by pure numbers alone. So striking the right balance is going to be hard, but good God, is it going to be worth it? Because if we can get this right, we can be quite impactful in our day-to-day lives. Because even like we see today with the US system, it's not perfect, right? We all live in imperfect systems. And so the influence and the directionality of what can be improved upon should be going both ways. And so what we improve and iterate on in Web3, I'm very optimistic that it will also spread over into your real life lived experience and will start to impact how you go about your day and how you elect your officials, how things are spent. And so it's still early, but I've never been more optimistic. So yeah, I don't know if that directly relates to Cardano particularly, but yeah.
Yeah, I want to answer your question with one word, which is resilience, right? I think that's actually quite an underestimated or underappreciated concept of Web3. And governance, OpenGov most certainly contributes to it, to the resilience of the ecosystem. We've got like sort of a new kind of way to talk about Polkadot recently, which is Polkadot is going to do to Web3 what AWS did to Web2, right? Make it more scalable, more easily accessible. But if you use this analogy, then I think one important question pops up, which is, what is the difference between Web 2 and Web 3? And I think the core feature that we should focus on is resilience, right? That's really what Web 3 brings. I think in one word, I think it's a great word, and we should talk more about resilience, right? Everyone's talking about scalability, and everyone's talking about, TVL. But actually, resilience is like, an incredibly important aspect here, and it comes in different flavors, right? So there is resilience from the from the technical perspective, like from the node operators or like the stake pool operators, right? Like, what can we do that they don't collude with each other, right? So that's kind of one important, like staking, that like staking is equally distributed, right? So all these things, they contribute to resilience. Okay, so that's kind of one bucket. Let's call it technically resilience. Now, a second bucket is in terms of development, right? To have like not just one entity developing the protocol, but multiple entities. And I guess you guys have multiple entities. We have like multiple entities, different clients, right? Like a multi-client interface, so that for whatever reason one team gets shut down, right? That's not the end of it, but like another team can pick it up, right? To continue the development. And then there is kind of the more wider, and that's kind of where I want to wrap here, is like kind of the resilience of community, right? That the community isn't just one voice, but it's multiple voices. And if a certain group of people get whatever shut down, or they get the government starts questioning them, or they get deplatformed or whatever, right? There's like another part of the community that can kind of pick up the work and be resilient, right? To push the Polkadot project forward. And so governance in its current form, to have every single dot holder participate in voting, is definitely something that increases resilience, right? It's not just one entity that could, like the government could go and say, okay, we're going to shut down the Web3 Foundation or Parity, right? They could do that in theory. But now with this increased decentralization, right, of governance, we're really working towards a more resilient protocol that is here to stay.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about resilience. Rome wasn't built in a day, and Bitcoin certainly didn't get to where it was in a year or even a decade. And so having that staying power is really what takes us to the next level. And thank you all for such a thought-provoking discussion. I hope everyone gained some valuable insights on the future and complexity of blockchain governance. Now I'd like to open the floor to some questions, and I already see one popping up, so let me just get the mic for you.
Hi, thanks. My name is Kent. I'm a graduate of the PBA. Hi, Max. This is a question for you, really, 1.1 vote, and open to the panel as well. So what if the government goes and buys a lot of dots? Okay, they're a mega whale, you believe in this constitution, and then they want more state centralization. You can't really stop it, can you? I mean, you've seen El Salvador buy Bitcoin. Sorry about that. Please go ahead.
The government, as in like a national government,
yeah.
You mean? Like
or
the US?
Sovereign wealth fund, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you're welcome to try, right? I mean, it's definitely going to drive up the market price, because a lot of people are not willing to sell their dot at the current price. So if they're really trying to accumulate like a meaningful stake, then you're very welcome to try, right? It's going to increase the price, but it's actually the same as a Bitcoin. I think people always ask the question, what happens if people if the government like tries to buy up all the Bitcoin, right? It's a pure hypothetically, it's not going to happen, right? It's going to drive up the price, and at some point the government is going to run out of money.
And I think, like Sheldon was also saying earlier, or actually, let's hear it straight from...
You go ahead first.
No, Sheldon was saying earlier that the whole point is that the community and all the votes collectively can outvote the big ones. And so even if something like that happened, I think the idea is that the rest of the troops would rally against that, and it would create a sort of uprising. And that's really where you see the value of on-chain government coming into action, is when it is actually against something, and you see that unity and you feel it within the ecosystem.
Yes, yeah. Well, so like going on that, actually, so and this is like a real life example of some concern around this early on in Cardano's governance days. Is we actually, because I worked at IOG before joining Emergo, and I had helped design a lot of the on-chain governance that is now being deployed. And for those of you who don't know, so There's Cardano improvement proposals, or SIPs, and so there's SIP 1694. But a key part of the preparation phase of getting to the on-chain governance side of things was actually calling up the exchanges that have so much ADA and just being like, please don't sabotage us. You just had to kind of go on like maintaining your reputation, and that was the hope, is that for these major exchanges that have a lot of ADA, and in particular we were concerned about Binance, right? And if Binance decides that they want to just fuck the chain, they kind of can, right? And that is a real concern. So you need to actually then put in the work of having a good relationship with this particular super whale, it's an exchange, but then also knowing that there is reputational damage that can be done here, right? If Binance decides that they want to swing a vote and then drain the Cardano treasury, every other protocol is going to know that they could be next, and they will dump those guys. And it just sends shockwaves throughout the whole industry, and it's probably not going to be worth it, right? So there is a bit of like an evolutionary mindset to what would be the consequences of this. And so that was a real life example. And so we need to stay ever vigilant, because we're not done, right? There is these possibilities that, yeah, things could be swayed.
Yeah, thank you for your 2 cents on that, Sheldon. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, Max. This is Monine. I'm a DAO lawyer. So we're talking about blockchain governance as if this is the only governance on-chain. But in structuring different legal structures for different DAO projects or blockchain projects, there's usually between 5 to 10 different legal entities and the DAO. So the totality of governance is on-chain plus different private entities. And a lot goes on behind the scene, which, of course, if you know the inner workings, you'll be shocked and totally appalled by the lack of governance. So what is available for voting and public participation is not the totality of the entire blockchain governance. I wish we have every single level and perspective well-governed and fully transparent, but we're not there yet, naturally. And those in power, the moderators and the core teams, may not necessarily, for good reasons, want to have everything out, every single penny accounted for. So what is the balance, is my question to you. Thank you.
Who do you want to answer?
Okay. Well, so it's a very good question, because there is no definitive answer, because ultimately, unfortunately for all of us here, we're all just kind of monkeys wearing clothes, right? We are still animals. We're still very tribal. And that is not going to go away anytime soon. We can't just like plug into the matrix and then like, oh, 1 ADA, 1 vote, and then have it all just ultimately settled that way. So we see it already now, where there are, to your point, these various DAOs getting organized, different like tribal associations, and they are quite tribal, right? We've got an association from Latin America. They've got a lot of sway. We've got the developer core, and they're doing their own thing off on the side and like scheming. And it's going to be a part of on-chain governance forever. As long as there's humans that have a pulse, that have an interest in this, there will be back-end and backroom dealing. And I'm not uncomfortable with that. I think it should be welcomed. To imagine that we can have like a nice, just binary ones and zeros governmental approach is a fantasy. And so, yeah, there will be no utopia, but it will get better. And so I don't know if that's an acceptable answer, but... Well, thank you. Embrace the chaos. It gets a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, so thank you guys. We'll close it off there. Please stay behind. You're more than welcome to stay for some networking and refreshments. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to our lovely panelists. A big round of applause for them. And we'll leave it at that.